Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome to EEE. We're excited to have everybody for our fall 2025 season. And to start things off, we have Russ Scully talking about Burlington. Russ Scully is a serial entrepreneur and lifelong water sport lover. He attended St. Lawrence University from 1987 to 1991, where he met his wife, Roxanne. Russ started his professional career as a technologist in the e-commerce space, developing custom web solutions for online retailers. 10 years later, he pivoted to focus on his passion for water sports by building the Spot restaurant and Wind and Waves lifestyle retail brand. In an effort to create warm weather winter escapes for the Vermont community, Russ and Roxanne purchased Villa Playa Maria in 2015, a boutique hospitality resort retreat space in Rincon, Puerto Rico. Russ served on the board of the Burlington Business Association from 2015 to 2021 and chaired the board for 2 of those years. In an effort to drive economic development opportunities for Vermont, Russ developed the startup technology incubator in the south end of Burlington, known as Hula. Hula hosts over 60 early-stage companies, a thriving co-worker environment, and a venture capital investment fund. So without any further ado, thank you, Russ. Take it over.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I just want to restate what was already said in the introduction, but I really apologize for not being there in person in front of all of you today. Sincere apologies to Linda Sparks and the whole EEE team, who really worked hard to try to make sure that I could be there. And unfortunately, I'm attending a trade show out in Portland, Oregon. And last night when I arrived at the airport, they gave me the unfortunate news that my flight had been canceled due to weather in Newark. So again, I'm very sorry not to be there. I know this is not the most ideal situation to see a presentation through Zoom. We all thought we were done with that a long time ago. But nonetheless, I'm happy to be here, excited to share this story of the origin of Hula and how it's now led to our next big project, which is this watershed residential development effort that's happening in the South End. So to get things started, I just want to give you a brief history of how we got here. So if you remember nothing from this presentation, please know that this whole story began with coffee. And specifically, as was mentioned, I started a web agency in the early 2000s. So for the first decade of the millennium, I was running a web product company known as Scully Interactive, and we developed an online product called eBeans. And we were selling subscription services to coffee roasters to help them sell coffee online. In the process of getting involved in the coffee industry, I met this guy. Some of you may know him. He's a well-known guy in the Burlington community. This is Dan Cox, who was a very early guy at Green Mountain Coffee. And Dan and I got to know each other really well from the trade show circuit, running around at the Specialty Coffee Association of America. So Dan and I would cross paths a lot, actually on the road at different coffee events, and he and I got to know each other really well. The significance of that is that Dan occupied an office here at the Blodgett Oven Factory. So this is a great shot if you haven't seen this or don't know where this is. Obviously, this is in the Burlington South End, right along the shores of Lake Champlain. And specifically, Dan was leasing this little building. This is a beautiful little space. It's a 2-story building on the Blodgett Oven campus. Blodgett did a really great thing in the sense of they had 10,000 square feet in this building that they were leasing to Dan and Coffee Enterprises. And in doing so, you know, the revenue that they saw from those leases actually covered a lot of the expenses on the rest of the property. So covered things like insurance and property taxes for the rest of Blodgett. So Dan was a guy who was very interested in helping me think about acquiring this property. So one day early in 2015, Dan walked into my water sports retail space called Wind and Waves. And Dan had never been to Wind and Waves before, so I was actually really surprised to see him there. And when he walked in, he said, "Hey, I'm not here to talk to you about water sports stuff. I want to let you know that Blodgett Ovens is interested in selling." And to this day, I really don't know why Dan thought I'd be interested, or even I don't really understand how he thought I might have the capacity to even take on a project like this. But nonetheless, Dan and I went to work, and with the help of a lot of the people at Blodgett Ovens, we were able to put together a bid for the purchase of this property with the intention of doing something really special in Burlington. Unbeknownst to us, we were bidding against one other bidder who is a well-known commercial developer in the state of Vermont. And so we submitted a bid alongside of the competing bid, and we eventually lost. We ultimately lost the bid. So in 2015, after spending a number of months and a lot of time trying to put together a competitive bid for this property, it went to this individual named Pat Malone. And Pat is, again, another well-known developer in the area who's done a lot of successful projects. And ultimately, what I found out was that when we had lost the bid, I essentially put together a note and I put together a letter and hand delivered it to Pat Malone's representative, a realtor that I knew. And I said, listen, please let Pat know, congratulations on the bid. He's got a great property on his hands. And I'm particularly interested in the northern portion of this property. So the Blodgett Oven parcel is
Hey, Russ,
14.
just a second. We're not seeing your slides in the auditorium.
Okay.
So Travis can show the slides, but what I think we have to take his
I'm sorry.
a picture off.
Which slide are you currently on?
I'm showing a shot of Pat Malone.
Is that, do you know the number of the slide or? Here, I can share what I am looking at.
Thank you.
Just let me know which one, if you're seeing what I'm looking at, or should I reshare? Probably. He's not seeing what I'm looking at.
How about now? Can you see the slide of the headshot of Pat Malone right against the Blodgett background?
There we go. Yep, I have it right now.
Okay, great. So if I advance, you should be able to see the next slide. Is that right?
If you just give me a cue for the next slide, I will advance them from now on.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so next slide. Great. So this is a letter that I sent to Pat Malone. So essentially what I want to do is I'm telling you the story of how this property came into being. And essentially, this is a letter that I sent to Pat Malone after he won the bid of the Blodgett property. And I said, listen, I'm particularly interested in this northern property, this northern parcel of the property where I would like to create a water sports center for our Wind and Waves retail brand. And I handed that letter to Pat Malone's representative, who was his realtor in the process of bidding for Blodgett Ovens. And then a number of weeks went by, and then Pat Malone visited me at Wind and Waves for the first time. And the first time I laid eyes on him and we met, and he agreed to selling me this property. He was actually really interested in carving off this parcel from the property because he was mostly interested in obviously the southern portion of the property where the buildings exist. And so decreasing the overall size of the property was actually really advantageous towards what he was trying to create. So next slide. A number of years went by. So Pat and Blodgett Ovens worked on the process of essentially recreating and building the new space that Blodgett would be moving into. Blodgett was actually very successful. As you know, they were initially a family-based company. This was these buildings and this site was a greenfield build way back in the 60s. They were producing up to 300 ovens a day out of this factory before they left in 2017. They were looking to move into a more state-of-the-art building where they could actually produce at a higher level and higher level output. They were purchased by a company called Middleby Corporation, and Middleby was acquiring additional large-scale commercial kitchen appliance brands, and they were moving those to Vermont because they were really happy and friendly with the way that Blodgett was operating the Blodgett oven business. So in order to scale that business, they really needed to find a space that was going to accommodate that growth. And that's really the only reason why they left the South End. So they worked with Pat for a number of years to essentially design and build the new space that Blodgett would move into. And during that time, I stayed in contact with Pat, and he and I had a number of conversations around how the progress was going and how the relationship with Blodgett was forming. During that time, he and I were having coffee about once a month. And during that time, he asked me a lot of questions, particularly about my continued interest in the project. And what I was learning over time is that his interest was really kind of softening. And one day he hit me with the ultimate question, which was, hey, listen, if I ever lost interest in this project, would you be interested in getting involved again? And I always answered emphatically yes, right? So as kind of what was mentioned in the intro, I really don't see myself as a developer. I've got a real strong entrepreneurial spirit. I'm active and involved in 6 different companies I've started in Burlington since I moved there in 1997. I really, again, don't see myself so much as a real estate developer, but I really believe in the concept of building community. If anything, I really see myself as a community developer. I have, as some of you may have known, we started with a small restaurant on Shelburne Road that we called The Spot. That grew into The Spot on the Dock, which has been a real popular, one of Vermont's largest restaurants on the waterfront in Burlington throughout the summer season. We talked about Wind and Waves. I built Wind and Waves. And all these businesses were essentially creating community. I was trying to create spaces where people could thrive and ultimately where things could happen in Burlington that didn't exist currently. So the day that Pat decided that he was no longer interested in developing this project, I raised my hand and I said, I would absolutely love to take this back from you. And at that point, he called me and said, I've just let Blodgett know that I've stepped out and you should expect a call from them. So that was in 2017. And at that point, Blodgett was they were a little bit tired of this process. They were emphatic about making sure that I could demonstrate that I could not only acquire the space, but I could finance the space and that I could actually move forward. So they did a lot of real short-term diligence, and they asked me to essentially move on a purchase and sale within a few short months. So fortunately, we were able to get through the diligence period, and sometime later, advance to the next slide, we converted that old industrial space into what's known today as Hula. So for those of you who've never been in this space, Hula is a technology campus. It's a 150,000 square foot building made up with now over 1,000 members, so 1,000 different users coming in and using this space, operating over 100 different companies out of this technology campus. When we started the process, we were really careful to curate the space. We wanted to attract technology companies that were not only growing fast, but also raising capital. Hula was designed and built with the intention of growing the workforce within the Burlington and Vermont communities. We knew that if we focused on high growth industry sectors, we had the best chance of creating a job growth engine that could withstand a lot of the issues that single employer situations were creating for Burlington. So we felt like the best way to really grow companies in Burlington is to create a startup ecosystem that allowed them to nurture and grow with access to the capital that they would need in order to expand. Next slide, please. In doing so, I was also able to create what's now called the Burlington Surf Club. So that northern parcel that I talked about with Pat Malone early on became a water sports center because we really believe in creating culture. I think it's really important not only to necessarily build and design all the economic elements that go into creating jobs, but it's important that we create some culture and some stickiness that allow us to take advantage of the gorgeous natural landscape that we have right outside of Hula. So this is a shot of a lot of the people who work at Hula who are able to get out and get on the water. The Burlington Surf Club offers uh, board rentals, lessons, equipment, showers, changing rooms, everything you need to essentially get to really demonstrate a work, play, life balance while you're on the campus. Uh, Around this time, there was a lot of growth in the popular areas like Silicon Valley and other startup cultures where they were really leaning into this lifestyle balance. And I felt like it was really important for us to try to create something similar that would ultimately help the employers that we were hosting in this building to attract and retain talent. It was it's we felt like this campus would help them and give them an advantage and a leg up if they were really trying to attract high caliber talent. We wanted to make sure that we were showing off a space that was attractive for people to come to and for careers and employers that they wanted to join. So if you go to the next slide, Travis. Um, Upon purchasing Blodgett Ovens, I met this gentleman. So this is my friend Rob Lair. And Rob Lair has been my partner throughout this entire process of building out Hula. And Rob was a guy who came out of the finance world, and he was working at the offices at Morgan Stanley in town. He, like a lot of other people, were really surprised to hear that that the Blodgett Oven project had now fallen into the hands of someone that a lot of people didn't know. I wasn't a person that was really well known in the business community. I did some time at the Burlington Business Association, as was mentioned, but nobody really expected that, Russ Scully from The Spot and from Winding Waves was somebody who was going to take on a project of this magnitude. I was referred to as essentially the dog that caught the car. Like I had put a lot of effort into chasing down this project and trying to acquire this and trying to build this out. And once I had finally acquired it through fate, this person walked into my life and said, "I want to leave my job at Morgan Stanley and I want to do this project with you." And so Rob Lair and I went to work to really try to optimize this opportunity as best we could. And in doing so, Rob brought the firepower and the experience to create what we called the fund at Hula. So if you go to the next slide, this is a quilt of different companies that we started investing in. So most of these companies exist within Hula, but it was important for us to understand that in order for these companies to grow, they had to be funded. So we launched a fund, we set aside some capital, and we started investing in companies. One of the things that was happening in Vermont at the time was there was a fractional, generous group of angel investors that had already created a venture capital ecosystem in Burlington. The challenge was for a lot of these companies is that if they're going out and trying to raise money and they're not able to complete the entire round in state, they're left to have to go out of state and to other venture capital groups outside of Vermont. And in doing so, it opens up the risk that some of these companies on those follow-on investments will get essentially pulled into other states, and we run the risk of losing them. So the better we could do at completing the entire rounds in state, the better chance we have of keeping them in state. So one of the things I'm most proud of that we accomplished through Hula was really catalyzing this disparate venture capital ecosystem and pulling a lot of people who are really interested in supporting Vermont companies into a single place where they knew that they could walk into and understand what companies were under this roof, who was raising money, and how they could participate. And that's one of the things I think today has really stood the test of time and really proven out the strategy for what we were trying to create at Hula. And then the next slide. So one of the first companies we invested in is one you've all probably heard of, right? But it's Beta Technologies. And the gentleman on the far right there is our friend Kyle Clark. So Kyle, as you know, is the founder of Beta. Kyle has a fascinating story, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And Kyle was great friends with Rob Lair. They both live in Underhill. I think when Rob started the fund and had the idea to create this venture fund, I think he already knew where our first investment was going to land. So in the very, very early days of Beta, Rob, Tim Stotts, and I, that's Tim Stotts from Morgan Stanley. Rob and Tim used to work together. Rob, Tim Stotts, and I went out and visited Kyle Clark. And at the time, if you go to the next slide, Travis, at the time, Kyle was working on building this. This is the electronic vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So eVTOL is the acronym, but eVTOL is essentially is an aircraft that can hover and fly. And it had never done it. This aircraft had never been designed or built before. Kyle was interested in trying to create this specifically for specific applications, and ultimately to be certified as the very first fully electric aircraft certified by the FAA. This was their early prototype. This aircraft is called Ava. Kyle actually built this aircraft. He delivered on his promise to his initial customer. And then upon further review and design review, they actually pivoted and changed the entire design of the aircraft. If you go to the next slide, to the one we recognize today. And this is a Leah. Kyle approached us because he was interested in furthering the gap that they had created early on in this industry. There were a lot of players in the eVTOL industry, and he had revenue coming in from a single customer that helped him launch the company. But he was interested in raising a little additional money to try to help to hire some additional people to just gain a little distance and a little gap on other competing companies that were trying to do the same thing. So if you go to the next slide, Travis. Ultimately, he gave us an opportunity. He said, hey, listen, I'd like to raise somewhere between $5 and $7 million. So Rob raised his hand. It's like, let us take a shot at that. So we went out to the community and we said, listen, and we started building a network. We started building a network of investors who are interested in investing in Vermont companies. And we said, listen, there's this really exciting aviation company out of the Burlington airport that's founded by a Vermont native, and it's got huge opportunities. As we approached different people who had a history of investing in Vermont companies, a lot of them asked two questions. They said, tell me more about Beta, and by the way, who are you guys? And so we really introduced ourselves through this opportunity of showcasing Beta Technologies as one of the first portfolio companies for investment. And so the answer we gave to a lot of people said, hey, listen, we're Hula. We're interested in elevating Vermont companies. We're here to help them raise money, ultimately grow jobs. And in the process, we formed a beautiful relationship with Beta, and we were able to help them raise a lot of money with a lot of local investors. So if you go to the next slide, Travis. This is an aerial map of the Hula campus. One of the things that was going on as we developed Hula is we were expecting a lot of members. We anticipated 1,000 people a day coming into this building. We had capacity to park just over 300 of those people. The industry averages that we understood were that 3/4 of your workforce will show up to work every day. 1/4 of them can't make it because of sick time or working from home or whatever it may be. But this is all, this is all pre-COVID. So we had a parking challenge on our hands. We needed to figure out how we were going to find the balance of another 400 parking spaces to satisfy the 750 cars we expected to come to Hula every day. So if you go to the next slide, Travis. Fortunately for us, directly kitty corner to us on the south side of the Hula campus was a large parking lot. And it's 8 acres in size. It's got 1,000 parking spaces. So we quickly entered into a lease arrangement with the owner of this parking lot and leased 400 parking spaces. The owner of that parking lot, if you go to the next slide, sorry, go to 2 slides, is Bobby Miller. So some of you may know Bobby Miller, but I got a chance to meet Bobby Miller, and I had many, many long conversations with him about ultimately purchasing this parking lot from him. We were successful in leasing the 400 spaces that we needed, but ultimately we knew that we were at risk of potentially losing those spaces if the parking lot was to ever sell or if the lease was ever terminated. So ultimately, my team put pressure on me to help secure those spaces by ultimately buying this parking lot. I had no intention of ever owning this parking lot other than that we desperately needed the parking, and we honestly didn't we weren't real comfortable with the idea of trying to lease them, knowing that on any given day we could lose half the parking spaces that we needed to satisfy everything we were trying to do at Hula. Bobby was a great guy. I got to meet him over a number of different meetings. I worked tirelessly with Bobby to negotiate on the price of the parking lot. We would meet for coffee over at the spot almost once a month. And he was a big fan of what we were trying to do. I tried to appeal to his sense of, he was a big fan of economic development. As all of you know, he was a big fan of Champlain College. He was a trustee of Champlain College. I told him, like, listen, every parking space that we make available to Hula is essentially a job. And I really tried to appeal to his sensitivity around economic development and the growth of Burlington. Ultimately, what I learned is that Bobby Miller is a tough negotiator, and essentially it came down to meeting him at his asking price. So I was ready to do that, and we went into a purchase and sale agreement. I signed the purchase and sale on a Monday, and notified, signed. The next day, that agreement got passed over to Bobby Miller's attorney, and Bobby went in to sign it. He walked into the office of his attorney. He went into another room to review the documents. Some time went by, and then his attorney knocked on the door and just to check to make sure he was okay. She opened the door, she walked in the room, and Mr. Miller was laying on the floor. Mr. Miller looked up at his attorney and said, "Get me a pen." She passed him a pen. He signed the contract. He said, "Please call 911." She did so. And then, as many of you may know, unfortunately, Bobby Miller passed that day. And signing this deal, it still kind of chokes me up a little bit, but signing this deal over to me was the last thing that Bobby Miller did. That left a huge burden, responsibility, and passion for me to make sure that this property ultimately gets used in the highest, best use that as Bobby would intended. And so I feel that strongly today. I feel like we have a debt to Bobby Miller to make sure that we use this property the way he would have intended, and we take that very seriously. But that was a moment in time where a twist of fate or a change in timing, and everything that we've done up until today would have been a lot different. So if you go to the next slide, Travis. After acquiring this parking lot, we realized that we needed to own this space because people were in the habit of driving to work. It was really frustrating from our point of view that we spent a lot of money to essentially buy a parking lot that will allow people to get to work by driving their cars. In demonstrating my frustration for that, we had to create an entity. We created an entity for this new property, and we named it Ride Your Bike. So to this day, if you look at the Burlington property tax database and you look at this parcel, it's owned by Ride Your Bike LLC. The adjoining properties, and Travis, you follow along with me, the adjoining properties, going back slide. Right after we entitled this property as Ride Your Bike, the next slide, Travis, is me getting a COVID test, if you're with me. At that point, COVID happened. And unfortunately for us, with COVID, a lot of things changes in terms of our strategy for how many people were coming to work those days, right? So this was during COVID, a lot of people, the work from home era began. And for us, now we owned a giant parking lot that, if you go to the next slide, Travis, was essentially empty. So hopefully you're on this overview slide that just shows us the empty parking lot. Now we owned a very expensive parcel within the city of Burlington that we no longer needed because post-COVID, as we all know, changed the dynamics of how people come to work. So we worked for a long time trying to figure out how we were going to solve this dilemma and ultimately what we were going to do with this parcel. So in 2020, we went to the city of Burlington and we said, listen, we have a parcel in the Enterprise District that we'd like you to consider to open for residential development. So many of you may know, but there's a serious lack of housing obviously going on in Burlington and in the rest of the country. And a big portion of the south end of Burlington was not zoned for residential use or development. So we went to the city and we asked them to consider opening it up, the Enterprise Light Manufacturing District, for residential opportunities. 2 years later, the zoning board approved what they called, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the zoning board approved what's now called the South End Innovation District. So for those of you who don't know, this is an overlay district that was created by the former mayor, Moreau Weinberger. And essentially, they created a perimeter around the south end that they would rezone for residential development. So this allowed us to really rethink kind of how we wanted to use this property and ultimately how it would benefit the companies at Hula. So if you go to the next slide, Travis, here's the ride your bike property that we saw before. The next slide should show you the City of Burlington's parcel on Sears Lane, directly to the south of us. And then the next slide is the Champlain College parcel directly to the east. So what we did is we partnered with our abutting neighbors, with the City of Burlington and Champlain College, to form an entity that ultimately would create a planned urban development encompassing these three properties. And we went to the City of Burlington and we started a process to create a neighborhood development project. And then if you go to the next slide, Travis, you'll see a headshot of Andrew Foley. So as we're building out the requirements and the plans for what we hope to build, we needed to find a development partner in the process to help us actually do this work. Again, we never saw ourselves as real estate developers. We're really here to make sure that we can accommodate the necessary job growth that we all look for and desperately hope to see happen in the Burlington area. A big piece of feedback that we were getting from a lot of the companies at Hula was the lack of housing, creating a real bottleneck on job growth. We recognized that the acute lack of housing in Burlington was a big problem for a lot of employers. They were desperately trying to hire. They were flying recruits in to visit, and then due to the challenges of trying to find housing, they lost a lot of talented people who went elsewhere. We recognize that as a huge problem for a lot of the companies in the technology spaces that we'd created, and we recognized that to unlock that bottleneck, we really needed to address the lack of housing. So in creating the plans for building this residential project, we needed to partner with somebody in the development space that knew how to build apartments. And fortunately for us, in the search to find a partner, this gentleman, Andrew Foley, was somebody who he'd heard enough things about our project that really caught his interest. And it takes a long time to really to draw in a development partner. It's a big ask on their part, because these are development companies that can only encompass so many projects per year. Each project they get into is a 10-year investment. So each one they have to consider carefully, because if they pick the wrong one, obviously they've wasted a lot of time. And in addition, they can only pick so many because there's a limited capacity of how many projects they can actually take on. There was something about our project that Andrew Foley really liked, and he participated in a number of Zoom calls over the course of 2 years with us. And he was ultimately trying to convince this guy, who was his boss. Sorry, the next slide, Travis. This is Jonathan Rose. And Jonathan Rose comes from the Rose real estate family in New York. Rose Real Estate is one of the 4 generational real estate development companies in Manhattan and greater New York from the past 4 generations. Jonathan was really interested in carving out a niche in residential development around affordable housing. Go to the next slide, Travis. Jonathan was he was really more interested in creating social impact in affordable housing and became the nation's largest affordable housing developer. Travis, you go to the next slide. You see a little bit of the statistics of what these guys have done, but overall, these guys they've built 19,000 units across the U.S. and they were starting to look at our project in Vermont. If you go to the next slide. Fortunately for us, Jonathan Rose was friends with a friend of ours in the state of Vermont named Peter Stein. Andrew Foley was working tirelessly to try to get Jonathan interested in our project. And Jonathan ultimately thought that Burlington and Vermont was too small of a market and he was really not that interested. And then sometime in the last 6 months, Jonathan was on a vacation with his friend Peter Stein, and the topic of Vermont came up, and the prospect of doing a project in Burlington. And Peter asked who the people were who were working on the project, and he answered, "It's these guys from Hula." And Peter said, "Well, those guys have demonstrated some real ability to get things done, and you should really consider working with them." So thankfully, Peter gave us a great nod, and Jonathan Rose went back to New York. He approached Andrew Foley and said, "I'd love to meet with those guys, get them down here." The next couple of days, Rob Lair and I flew down. We sat across the conference table from Jonathan Rose, told him about his project, which ultimately got him up to Vermont for a visit to Hula. And when he walked into Hula, I think he was convinced at that point that this was a group of people that could pull something together that would be really unique and exceptional. So that's when we started. So that partnership with Jonathan Rose set off a mission to transform these 13 acres of surface parking lots into what we hope to be a sustainable, thriving, walkable, mixed-use neighborhood. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a rendering. So this is what we have planned. So these 13 acres will essentially encompass almost 1,300 apartment units. And if you go to the next slide, Travis, what we're prepared to do initially is phase one of this project will encompass 200 units, will come online in the summer of 2028. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a zoomed out view of that parcel. So this is the northwest corner of Lakeside Avenue and the train tracks. This is directly kitty corner from Hula. There's two different buildings here made up of 200 apartments that'll act as phase one, and these units should be coming online in summer 2028. If you go to the next slide, this is a view of what that'll look like from Lakeside Avenue. So these are some early renderings and design of what we plan to build. This is a 6-story building that has essentially been zoned for additional occupancy and density that goes beyond what's currently zoned in this part of town today. If you go to the next slide, this is a view along what we're calling the Innovation Lane, which goes north-south. The Innovation Center at the top of the street there is what you can see in the foreground. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things we were really hoping to do with this development project is create community. I mentioned earlier on that that's one of the things I'm most passionate about. This slide is a view of a couple of standard hallways in what we would call traditional apartment buildings. This is a double-loaded corridor. In my opinion, this is exactly what we did not want to create. These are, in my opinion, really kind of isolation chambers. This doesn't foster community. It doesn't really put you in a presence of mind to really get to know your neighbors. I think it's really hard to grow community in spaces like this. So if you go to the next slide, what we're intending to build instead is we want to build outdoor, open, well-lit spaces using a hallway system that essentially allows you to get to know your neighbors and be able to see the comings and goings of everyone in the building. We learned this lesson when we built Hula. A lot of the Hula space is, in lieu of sheetrock, we use glass. So if you've ever been in there, you know that when you walk down the hallways and past the offices, you'll see that there's a transfer of sight that allows everyone to see everyone else. And what that does is it creates these collision spaces so that people have unanticipated conversations that lead to outcomes that nobody would have expected, other than that being able to see each other and connect with each other was really what fosters community. So by building this outdoor deck system to serve as our hallway, we're really hoping that this will help create and foster a stronger community within this neighborhood project. If you go to the next slide, this is another view of what that hallway system looks like. Again, this showcases the 6-story elevation of the building and the systems and outdoor terraces that go with that. If you go to the next slide, this is what we're trying to create. This is a cross section of a standard apartment. These are going to be small living spaces. Again, these spaces are targeted to early workforce development people. So this is on average about approximately 450 square feet. It has all the amenities that 20 and 30 something year old working for a technology company in this space we're looking for. These are going to be designed to be small spaces. We're also doing this at a time that's very challenging in terms of cost of construction and cost of borrowing money. So one of the things we're trying to do, if you go to the next slide, well, here's the roof deck view. We have, as you know, this is a great location within the South End, and at 6 stories, we have great views of the lake, which I think is just going to make it that much more attractive for the people who are living there. And then, yeah, if you go to the next slide, so what you should see is this. One of the things that as I mentioned, is the timing for construction right now is particularly difficult. The cost of construction is really high coming out of COVID. The cost of borrowing money is really high. So one of the things we're really leaning on is we're working on innovative ways of delivering high density apartment projects as cost effectively as we can. As many of you know, the challenges of cost of living have everything to do with cost of construction, so that cost of construction really drives the rental pricing in the Burlington market. So if we can build things less expensively, we can keep the rent rolls down, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. I firmly believe that increasing the supply of our housing stock will help us lower the cost of living in Burlington, which is ultimately one of the things that people consider when they're either taking a job at Burlington or elsewhere. So this is an interesting company called Volumetric. And Volumetric has essentially figured out how to create pre-manufactured apartment buildings made off-site to whatever specification you're looking for, and then they're delivered by train or truck and placed in place on site and built into any configuration that we want. And again, the goal of this approach is really trying to keep construction costs down while also building out an environment that's attractive for the types of tenants that we're looking for. Next slide is an overview of the site. So this gives you a sense of the massing. This is what's called a massing drawing. But it gives you a sense of the size of the buildings and the scale of this project. As I mentioned at the top, this will be one of Vermont's largest housing projects to date. We're anticipating and hoping for it to build out at least 1,300 to 1,400 units over the course of 8 to 10 years. The first few units that I pointed out are the ones in the detailed drawing here in the center of your screen. These are those 2 buildings. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that's really important to us is, we've always had an emphasis on sustainability and environmental impact on a lot of our projects. Some of you may know the Hula project took advantage of geothermal wells. We have an abundant water supply right next to the lake that fuels all the heating and cooling that we need to do in that building. So ultimately, the Hula campus, if you go to the next slide, coupled with our solar array, creates a net zero climate impact effect on the building. Fortunately, we have the same environmental elements happening over at Ride Your Bike at the parking lot across the street. So the apartment complex that we're planning to build over there will have essentially the same amenities. So we're going for the same net zero effect. Okay, if you go to the next slide, this is a block of concrete. Hopefully you're on the same slide I am. This is a block of concrete. One of the things we learned, ironically, is that we purchased this parking lot ultimately to satisfy the parking needs we had for Hula. And now we're really trying to focus on density and in apartments and living space. So the cost of building a parking garage these days is up in the $40 million price range. It costs on average $40,000 per parking space to create a parking space. I didn't feel like that was a great use of money. One of the challenges is that no one wants to pay for parking these days. It's hard to see, but it's starting to happen. The dependency on vehicles is really softening. And as we see these companies like Waymo and self-driving cars, which I know sounds like it's far away, it's approaching much faster than we think. The idea of investing $40 million into a parking lot that won't live past 10 years in usability is a really tough thing to try to take on. So instead, we thought this is a great opportunity for us to experiment and be a little bit early in this movement of putting less emphasis on the car. And again, we're targeting early workforce people who are really concerned about environmental impact and sustainability. These are people that we feel like are good subjects to experiment with an alternative transportation plan. So if you go to the next slide, this is our plan is to create alternative transportation methods for everyone who lives in this property. So everything from biking to increased bus lines and bus availability to rideshare programs to a robust car share program. And in studying the transportation options we had, if you go to the next slide, we've met this woman, Annie Borden. And if you don't know who Annie is, Annie, go to the next slide. Annie started Car Share Vermont. And before moving to Vermont, Annie lived in San Francisco, where she created a car share program in San Francisco that was very successful. She lives in the South End now, and she's created the car share program that currently exists in Burlington. Some of the selling points of car share are just what you see up top here. We talk about cost of living. We can reduce cost of living by not owning a car. On average, if you don't own a car, you're saving $700 a month, right? So for a lot of the people that are trying to figure out how they're going to afford to live in Burlington, this is one easy way to do it. If you go to the next slide, our intention, this is my personal intention in this project, is to create the nation's first 100% car share community. We really think we can do this because of the location of where we are in the South End, the proximity of the bike path, the proximity to town, and the nature of the tenants that we're seeking to fill in this building. We're hopefully feel the same way and are interested in being part of this movement. If you go to the next slide, this is the view of the side of the buildings we looked at previously. And one of the things that any apartment developer needs to focus on or think about is the ground floor use. A lot of ground floor use gets built out in a similar way where it's retail and restaurant space and things of that nature. If you go to the next slide, these are 4 images of the South End that really show the vibrancy of the South End and the things that we've come to love about the South End. These are all spaces that already exist currently. And one of the things we don't want to do with the ground floor space of our project is be redundant or duplicative with anything that's already happening in the South End. Instead, what we'd rather do is really enhance and amplify these businesses by creating additional, more vibrancy, more people, more foot traffic, essentially take advantage of the spaces that already exist. So instead, if you go to the next slide, we've worked with our partners at Generator. And Generator is actually one of the Generator space is actually directly south and abutting one of the property owners to our development project. In talking to Generator, what we'd like to do, if you go to the next slide, is we'd like to use the ground floor space of this project to create maker spaces. the South End Innovation District is really about creating an ecosystem of makers and doers and entrepreneurs. When you live in an apartment, you forfeit the space that a lot of homeowners have with garages and other workspace environments like that. What we'd like to do with the ground floor spaces of this project is to create those kind of spaces that foster community, build collaboration, and allow people to work together in an environment that that helps to build and foster community. And these are the same people that are the engineering minds and the innovators and the founders and all of the startup company participants that love to tinker with things. And so by creating the spaces that allow them to innovate and collaborate, even while they're at home, I think we're going to get a better product. So if you go to the next slide, here's an overview yet again of the South End development area. And these are the different players involved. We've got, obviously, we have the Hula campus, the Ride Your Bike space, the City of Burlington, Generator, and Champlain College. One of the things we're attempting to do in bringing all these different organizations together is to create a startup ecosystem that really brings together higher ed, startup, a startup culture, and residential, all in the same space that creates and fosters a workforce development ecosystem that really fuels on itself. So that's the South End Innovation District. Next slide. If you would like to hear any more or learn more about this project, you can visit us at hulalakeside.com/watershed. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions and answers. And again, I hope that you were all able to follow along with me. And I hope that the slide transition worked out okay. And that I hope you found this to be an entertaining story, albeit through Zoom. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Russ. That was amazing. If anybody has questions, you just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic over to you.
Hi. My background is construction, and I'm interested. Are you trying to make LEED buildings? Are you going to go for that?
Yeah, I think we are. And, you know, I think that's a great question. So LEED certification is really interesting. What I've learned about LEED a little bit is that, you know, to get the LEED certification has a cost attached to it. The intention behind LEED is great. And I think a lot of developers, particularly myself and our team, yeah, we're very interested in creating a building that has the lowest environmental impact possible, creating the greatest insular value, R factor values, and so on. Those volumetric buildings that I showed earlier, they have, what's really interesting about that is when you put two blocks together, you've got two interior walls instead of one. So the insular value of that is even higher than what would be LEED certified. And so, yes, the intention is to create a very low impact, environmentally friendly product in the best way possible.
Hey Russ, it's Peter Kreisel. Sorry to miss you in person.
Peter, hello.
How are you? Hey,
I'm great. How are you?
Am I correct in understanding that you're also involved in developing some of the area along Pine Street that borders the Barge Canal, or is that somebody else?
Oh, I think that's somebody else. So it's directly across. Yes. So, you know, the history of that property, Rick Davis owns that property, right? So Rick Davis from the Maltex building. And for a long time, we were really hoping that Jovial King was going to develop that property into the bathhouses and the spa that she was trying to create. You know, the cleanup effort, I think there was more significant than she anticipated, and so she had to move on. But then I have heard there's another apartment building project that's in the works, and I believe it's Doug Netty's. So I think Doug Netty has a plan to build something over there. I think it's gonna be 2 stories high. I don't know how many units he's thinking about building. But yeah, I think that's what's happening over there.
Hi, Russ. It's Lori Tucker.
Hello, Lori.
Hi.
Oh my gosh, there's so many people in there.
So I
Okay.
thought I heard you say that there were going to be condo opportunities there. So I live in a house, and at my
Yes.
age, I'm ready to let go of the house and have a condo. So, what's the possibility?
It's a great question. Right now, one of the things that's happening is we've got to meet a 20% affordability standard in this project, right? So it'll be 80% marketplace, 20% affordable. Jonathan Rose, who's our partner, as I mentioned, they don't participate so much in condos. They own and hold everything that they develop. So as I said, they own 19,000 units across the United States. They are particularly interested in a buy and hold model. That's not to say that future developments won't have an element of some condominiumization so that there is a selling opportunity for people who want to own. And those could happen in future phases. So, one of the things that's interesting about this, this is going to be this is going to be a long time period before we fully realize the entire build out of this space. This is a 10-year horizon for us. And so we're bringing units on initially, one at a time. That helps us obviously with financing and making sure that we can lease them up before we go into future phases. But there's nothing that says that future phases may not include some sort of condo component so that things can be owned. And I also, I think we'll see how the trend curve plays out, but I think that there's certainly an interest from people that are, selling their long owned single family homes and renting. And I think that they're able to, because right now the real estate market's really particularly expensive. So you can sell sort of at the high end of the market, and then you can start thinking about what you want to do next. And by renting a space, you have a lot more flexibility. You have a lot more maneuverability in terms of being able to get out and about and move around and do some vacationing and so on. And so this is one of the things we're paying attention to. We do feel like there's a trend among sort of the population of people that are interested in selling their single family homes, and they're interested in renting. And so it's something we're going to be paying attention to. Thanks for the question, Laura.
What public funding or tax incentives will this project rely on, and how will you adapt if the federal funding streams change under our new political climate?
That's a great question. So the way these projects are financed is that it's 50, 40, 10 is kind of the breakdown, or 50, 30, 20 are the percentages, right? So 50% of the financing is done by a bank. And that's where we get obviously the biggest slug of capital. And then we've got to raise another 30 to 40% through limited partners. So we're actually going to go out to the local community, and we've started to do a little bit of this already. Fortunately, we had, as I mentioned, we built a lot of great relationships through, the investment funds that we created at Hula. And so a lot of those same people have the same mission that we do. They're trying to unlock this job growth engine. They realize that building housing capacity is really the necessary critical next step for us for all these companies to realize the job growth potential. And so those same suspects, or those same usual suspects, are the people we're going to go to help us try to raise the limited partner capital. And so that's debt financing at a pretty attractive rate. Those are rates that we're working on right now, but somewhere around, I think, a 14% IRR on that 35 to 40% of capital that we need as part of that financing stack. And then the final piece are the general partners. So that's Jonathan Rose and myself who have to come up with the initial 10 to 15%. So, in terms of any subsidies, there are grant applications that we're applying for all different kinds of tracks. As I said, I can't emphasize it enough. The cost of borrowing capital is just really high right now. Construction is really high right now. This is where it's really helpful to have a partner like Jonathan Rose, who's done this so many times. They know where to go to. They know They know the places to go to. They know that they know what options and opportunities exist. There's also some great, we've had some great conversations with the state. They've been really friendly about this project. The really great thing is we're all pulling in the same direction. I think everyone understands that we're desperately in need of additional housing. So the state's really come forward and helping us figure out some low interest loan capabilities to borrow against to help finance it that way as well.
So I think it's 3 o'clock. It's time to wrap it out. I don't think we have any time for more questions, but let's give a big round of applause for Russ. Fantastic presentation to start off the year. Thanks, Russ.